Adrienne Lett is a civil engineer and a Low Country resident who's also now a Democratic candidate for South Carolina House District 114. She talks to me one-on-one about the issues and why she's running for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Adrienne Lett, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly. Needless to say, you are a Low Country resident and a civil engineer who's also now a Democratic candidate for the South Carolina House District 114, which covers.
It covers parts of West Ashley and parts of Somerville. So it kind of covers parts of outer West Ashley.
Right.
I like to summarize it as pretty much the Bees Ferry area. It also goes down 61 a little bit. I live personally by like the CVS on 61, but then it goes all the way up 61, includes the Ponds, Legend Oaks, a couple of those big subdivisions in Somerville. It does cross the Ashley River at one point and includes a tiny little sliver of North Charleston, but yeah, just a very small sliver. But that one point is kind of very hard to get to from anywhere else in the district, unfortunately.
Wow. With all of these areas right now in that particular district, why this seat? Why now?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons that went into me wanting to run. I don't want to go through my whole life story and every step of that. But ultimately, when it came time to the filing deadline approaching, I looked up who had registered to run in this district. And I saw that the incumbent had registered to run again. And I looked up his voting record. I didn't know much about him, so I looked up his voting record. And he voted for a lot of things that I just did not support at all. He supported the open carry law, which was widely opposed by almost every law enforcement official. He supported the school vouchers and the expansion of the school vouchers, which were found to be unconstitutional. He supports an abortion ban from conception with no exceptions. And none of that really sat right with me. So that was when I reached out to the Democratic Party here in Charleston County, and I just asked them, like, is somebody going to run against him? Because I wanted to be able to vote for someone who shares my values and who I can be proud to vote for and who I want to represent me in this seat. And there was nobody running, so I decided that I will be that person who I want to be proud to vote for, who I want to represent me, if nobody else is going to do it. And, I signed up and I decided that if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do a good job. So I've been going hard, spending pretty much all of my free time campaigning. So yeah, there were a lot of factors that went into it. Also just me learning a lot more about the state of politics in South Carolina over the last few years. It just kind of boiled over. But the kind of tipping point was this filing deadline and learning about my opponent's voting record.
And I hope to get Gary Brewer, the Republican incumbent, back on Quintin's Close-Ups to get his side of the story on all of those issues. And some of the issues I'll touch on in a few minutes here on Quintin's Close-Ups. But let me ask you, in your particular district, District 114, do most of the constituents there actually share your values on these issues?
A lot of them do. We have seen there's tons of polling all around everywhere showing that most people do not support things like a total abortion ban from conception with no exceptions. Most people at least support exceptions for, victims of assault and whatnot. A lot of people are against the open carry law. They don't support that. They just think that it's not safe. Even a lot of Republicans. I've spoken to a lot of people who have historically voted Republican, and they just don't like a lot of these policies. They don't like the way the state is going. And they want to change. And a lot of them do share these values.
Well, let me just jump right into it because, as you know, earlier this year, South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster signed a bill allowing permitless handguns to actually be carried into law. He signed that law allowing adults to carry loaded handguns openly with no permit or training. Adults 18 plus who can legally possess guns can now openly carry them with no permit or prior training. Let me ask you this, Adrienne. Does this bill, in your mind, affirms Second Amendment rights rather than expansions?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean by like affirm or expand it, but the people who say that it does affirm the Second Amendment, they love to say that, the Second Amendment shall not be infringed, and that's part of the Second Amendment. But the first few words of the Second Amendment are well regulated. So most people have absolutely no problem with just saying, hey, you can carry a gun, just get a permit or have some training and, just very basic requirements. Most people are in support of that. That's what I'm in support of, is just some training, some requirements, some permits. It should be the bare minimum to just have some training in this area.
Do you believe that there are still infringements with this particular law now that it's actually in law?
Do I think that they're
Still infringements now,
um
now that the law has been passed.
I I'm not sure exactly what you mean by infringements. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, do you, as I just mentioned, and you talked about it a little bit, infringements with the Second Amendment, do you believe that there are still infringements with this particular law now that it's been passed?
Um, I think that I don't think, me personally, I do not believe that saying that people should get training or get a permit is not an infringement on that right. Just saying that people should have guns as long as they're safe with them, that should be the bare minimum. I don't think that that is infringing on the Second Amendment. Um, and yeah, that is how most people feel as well.
Well, let me ask you this then, Adrian. What was actually lost to gain this permitless carry?
What do you mean? What was lost?
When you, obviously, certain things have gone into law. What has been lost because of this, in your mind?
Oh, there's been a lot of sense of just safety lost, especially when people are just in public. There was one example that I always like to think of is there was some festival, I think it was like a rice festival or a grits festival or something. I think it might have been in no, not
Yes,
St. George. Oh, it wasn't St. George. Okay.
yeah, the
If
World's
that's the
Grits
one that,
Festival.
yeah. If that's the one that I'm thinking of, the festival was actually shut down because it was like a public festival on the street and someone was there carrying a handgun and like they were legally allowed to carry this handgun and keep it on their person and have it at this festival. But there was just a sense of not being safe and not feeling safe. And so this festival was canceled or it was halted because of the presence of this handgun, because of this law that allowed people just openly carry a gun. So I think the community is sensing a big fear of, having just guns around us all the time in the public, knowing that a lot of these people don't have any training, don't have any permits, don't have any requirements that they needed to meet to ensure they're being safe with this weapon in public.
In District 114, how many people, how many constituents have actually gotten training with this?
I'm not entirely sure how many people have had training.
Well, let me ask you this. Since this bill has actually gone into law, how much has gun crime gone down in your particular district?
I'm not entirely sure on the statistics within the district.
In your mind, does this bill expunge those who've been arrested or given police records for carrying weapons without a permit?
I do not. I think that this was discussed when the bill was discussed. I do not think that it retroactively expunges those records.
Does this particular bill grandfather them in? Do you think it should?
Do I think like that their records should be expunged?
Yeah, grandfathered in.
Okay. Um, I mean, it's kind of a. I think that the law should not exist in the first place. So I think that you know, in an ideal world, this law would not exist. So that should still be considered a crime to carry a gun like openly without training, whatever they were arrested for in that scenario. But if this law is on the books and people are now allowed to, do this, carry a gun around without training or anything, I think that those people who were charged with this in the past, they should not necessarily still have that on their record. Very similar things with like marijuana possession in states where it's legalized. I think that those people who in the past have had minor possession charges, those people should have that expunged off of their records or have their sentences shortened, terminated.
That brings me to my next question, Adrian. As you know, COVID, made a impact on many people's lives and how things have, changed so far since that time. Has COVID, in your mind, made backgrounds more difficult as far as the loophole?
Has it made background checks more difficult?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that something that I'm not entirely sure if that's something that COVID affected? But I do know that there have obviously been instances in the past where that loophole allowed people who should have failed their background check to obtain a gun. And bad things have happened in those scenarios. And I think that we do need stricter background checks. We need more thorough background checks. And yeah, it's just for the safety of everyone.
How do you actually create a culture of gun safety?
there's a lot of factors that go into it. It's not just, there is a lot to it, in terms of socially and legally and in terms of legislation that we are capable of passing. But I know that from my standpoint in the legislature, we could start. The bare minimum should include things like having actual comprehensive background checks that do not have loopholes, not allowing people without training to carry guns openly, things like safe storage laws that will punish the gun owner if they have a gun, but then something happens, like their child gets access to the gun and then hurts someone with it. Punishing the owner of that gun who did not have it safely stored, stuff like that can at least start moving us in the right direction. And we should have those policies to help move us in the right direction. And that's something that I would love to see happen in the state legislature when I'm elected.
And this is probably a redundant question, but how would you actually require a safe and secure gun storage?
Yeah. So of course we can't go into people's homes and, check. So it would be more of you know, it would be more of an enforcement if something bad were to happen. Obviously, it's not feasible to just go and check on every single person's home, every single person who owns a gun. Just, you could ask them and say when they buy the gun, just, do you have a way to securely store this in your house? Having a question like that, obviously it's not enforceable, but just having something like that to get that idea there is good. But again, when there is something like a crime that is committed because a child in a household maybe got access to their parent's gun or something because it wasn't securely stored, then those parents should be held liable to an extent for whatever happens as a result of that child getting access to that gun because it was not safely stored.
And when it comes to that, argument obviously about gun safety, what else would you enact as far as law in the state house?
Yeah, as I said, the safe storage law, great one. Repealing the open carry law, just requiring basic training and permits to carry a gun openly or concealed. And things like red flag laws can also be great, in certain scenarios. Just, pretty much the things that I've already mentioned.
How many people have actually in your district gotten permits since this law has passed?
I'm not entirely sure, but I don't think that it's that many, especially when they're not required to get permits anymore. It's just, now it's an extra step that's not required. So a lot of people, it was assumed when passing this law that a lot of people would not go through with getting a permit because they no longer need a permit.
And I want to get back to that in just a second, but going back to your district, obviously, House District 114 you just covered, how do you actually make House District 114 so that the state of South Carolina can be better tomorrow?
There's a lot of changes that can be made in District 114. A lot of them do relate to infrastructure. That's one of the issues that I discuss most with people when I'm going door knocking, when I'm talking to constituents. They care a lot about it in terms of not just roadways and traffic, but also with our flooding, with our housing accessibility, our public transit. All those things tie into it, and those are all kind of integrated into the idea of infrastructure. And improving infrastructure in a holistic way is something that would really help all residents of District 114 and the entire state of South Carolina.
Yes, ma'am. So as we sit here right now, what exactly is your 5-point plan for housing availability?
I don't know if I have a 5-point plan, but I think that there's a lot of different ways that we could address it, including there are existing incentives that I guess that are being provided to developers if they include some affordable housing in their development process, but they often don't include enough. And it's often still not affordable by most people's standards. There's a complex that is going up in West Ashley, not in my district, but nearby my district. And there's like affordable housing being included in that. I think they call it workforce or attainable housing, but it's only 30 something apartments. And I think they're all 1-bedroom apartments and they're about $1,600 a month, which is not affordable for most working people. It's not affordable for our teachers. It's not affordable for our first responders. And, that's just not enough. 30 apartments is ultimately not a lot of housing for not a lot of people, especially when they're all just 1-bedroom apartments and not geared towards families or anything. So those incentives that are being provided to developers, those need to be narrowed down. Those need to be more specific in terms of what is actually affordable and the quantity that should be required to actually provide a benefit to everyone. We need things like housing in more accessible locations and integrating public transit into where those housing developments are. I would love to see more mixed use development with a bunch of, stores on the bottom and then apartments on the top. Yeah, stuff like that. It's just a great use of space. It helps with traffic and, people don't have to necessarily go very far to get the things that they need when they're just right there in that neighborhood. Stuff like that I would love to see happen. And I think it could really make a big difference in South Carolina. I know that some of those issues do have to do with more with like the county level or for sure. A lot of those have to do with like the county level stuff and zoning laws and whatnot. But I think that the state legislature still needs to work with those other levels of government to make this stuff happen, because ultimately it is about helping the people in the district, and that should be the primary goal.
So if you were to go to Columbia as a state representative, how would you actually rework that zoning law so that you can make those things happen?
Excellent question. I would have to look into that more to see exactly what would need to be done, but just allowing for more mixed use development is a great start, because right now it's very separated in terms of this can be commercial, this area can be residential, and this has to be single family residential, this has to be apartments and townhomes. It's all very separate, but just any sort of rewriting of that legislation that would allow for more mixed use, get rid of those very separated zoning areas, that would be a great start.
Well, how many zoning areas do you have in District 114?
Oh, I don't know. I know there's quite a few. The terminology is different in different areas and whatnot. Obviously there's commercial, obviously there's single family, obviously there's multifamily. I think there's also like a duplex, triplex zoning of some sort. There's a bunch of different types of zoning. I don't know the exact number that exists.
Yes, ma'am. No worries. Well, let me ask you this. It is, well, I'll just jump right into it. So what's more important right now for your district? Is it building new homes and, obviously commercial space, or is it rehabbing, expanding, and better utilizing the existing homes?
I mhm. I personally think that working with what we have and rehabbing that is it's more sustainable long term, and it's more kind of easier to do just like from the get go, as opposed to designing like a whole new complex, a whole new everything starting from scratch. So I do very much support the refurbishment and kind of reuse of existing spaces, 1,000%. I think that that's very, very important and can be very effective, but issues also come into play there with the like existing layouts and then changing zoning. Of course, if that's an issue, changing zoning is also very difficult to do sometimes. And then just also, changing something from maybe not residential to residential, or from like single family to multifamily, just ensuring that all the building codes are met and all those other requirements. There's a whole lot to go into with that. But ultimately, I think that could be, with a little bit of collaboration and cooperation, that could be easier for us to do as opposed to starting from scratch, building new. But I think both are important.
This might be a very unique question, but what public-private partnerships would you be in favor for to make all of those things that you just mentioned happen?
Yeah, I would love to see some public-private partnerships, in terms of stuff like that. I know that that's often very difficult for stuff like ensuring that there is affordable housing, because when developers are primarily geared towards profit and not necessarily to the needs of the community, sometimes they aren't willing to engage with projects like that, that will necessarily mostly just be of benefit to the community and not necessarily are for cost. But yeah, as I said, things like those incentives that can encourage them to build some affordable development, funding that can be provided through the county, the state, the city, through any municipality, any public means, that could also be a great help to encouraging that partnership. I think that there's a lot of opportunity there, but just nailing down the specifics will have to be the difficult part.
And what else is also difficult is finding land here in the Low Country. So what existing space do you have left in House District 114?
There's a decent amount of open space. There's some abandoned buildings that exist, just abandoned sites in general. As I mentioned, the affordable affordable um, housing that's going up just outside of my district. That's an old grocery store site. There's a old grocery store site by where I live that's partially being used for like a new fire EMS station, but there's still a whole front of that property that appears to not be used. There's a bunch of other properties like that. And again, even just things like if we have existing strip malls that are just on the bottom level, just a bunch of stores, if there were a way to rezone and kind of revamp those existing areas, especially to protect those small businesses that are currently in those spaces, but also add stuff like some housing on top.
Cool. Okay.
Stuff like that could be very, very transformative for the area and the district.
Well, let me ask you, because I mean, obviously, this is another big topic right now, but you just mentioned all of that as far as reworking the zoning and everything. Where exactly in District 114 can you place a TIF?
Mm, I would have to look into that more. I'm not exactly sure where the TIFs can be applied within the district specifically.
Okay.
Mhm.
When it comes to the community's needs, as far as housing, what exactly do they need? Do they need affordable housing? Is it attainable housing? Or is it workforce housing?
Well, they're all very those are typically used as synonyms of each other.
Mm,
Um it's usually just depends on how the people want to use those words, kind of the connotation that they want to have with it. Usually affordable housing is kind of seen as like lesser quality or something, or like public housing. Workforce housing is one of the terms that's usually used to like dress it up, kind of refer to people like our teachers and our first responders, the people who really make our society function. So to me, when I say affordable housing, workforce housing, attainable housing, I'm all talking about the same thing.
okay.
I'm just talking about housing that can be, that's a reasonable percentage of the income of people who are police officers, teachers,
Yeah.
nurses, people like that. Just having something that they can live in that's safe and, a great place for them to live, but that's also not eating up more than half of their paycheck.
What is the typical income for a resident in House District 114?
I think it is I think it is somewhere in the 50,000 area, 50 something thousand.
Sure.
Mhm.
So, and obviously, you have a lot of residents right now. So, where do you see those growth projections in the next 5 to 10 years there?
It's I the whole Charleston area is pretty much projected to just continue to grow out, continue to expand. Within District 114, it is quite populated already, as we said, at the top of the district, at the bottom of the district, but now we're seeing more subdivisions pop up along Highway 61, kind of by where the plantations are. We saw, I think it's Watson Hill pop up not that long ago. That's one of the new ones showing up there. So there is a lot of potential for even more development along that historic corridor, but that's a whole other question. But yeah, in general, there is projected to be significant population increases in the Charleston area and the Somerville area in general. And of course, any growth in those areas increases the traffic in the area, increases the traffic in the district. So I do anticipate the population increasing, especially if we, find creative ways to add more housing. Like as I mentioned, with refurbishment of strip malls and adding more attainable, affordable workforce housing, I do anticipate seeing that go up pretty much at the same rate as, the Charleston area.
And last year I spoke with former North Charleston Police Chief Greg Gomes, and he mentioned that obviously North Charleston Police will have a substance station in Watson Hill, so that's going to be a part of North Charleston. But let me ask you this: how can you ensure growth in District 114 with smart growth?
The There's been a lot of discussion about this. I've gone back and forth on it a lot with some people. I think that smart growth doesn't necessarily need to incur a massive additional cost. That's a lot of concerns that some people have, is that if we say, we add a few additional rules in terms of connectivity, just prioritizing the needs of the residents, that if we add rules like that, then developers will have to pay more to develop. They will be less incentivized to develop and build additional housing. So then that'll raise up the cost of our housing, all of that. But I think that there are ways that we can ask them to address some additional issues going on without incurring massive additional fees. Things like in the ponds, there are in the ponds, there's one entrance and exit for 1,000 something people. And that's insane. And it takes people like 30 minutes to get out in the morning when they're going to work. And there are a couple of emergency access points in that subdivision. And they say, those are available for ambulances, fire trucks, whatever. And if there's ever an evacuation, those will be opened. People can leave those ways. But ultimately, that doesn't help them with their day-to-day struggle of taking 30 minutes to just get out of their neighborhood when they're going to work. Things like requiring just more than one entrance exit to a subdivision with like a certain minimum number of houses, stuff like that can improve quality of life so much. And it's just adding a road. It's not like a huge additional expense in most cases. And stuff like that could really just improve the quality of life of the residents and everyone around the surrounding area.
So, what is the typical cost of a house in your district?
I think the average cost in West Ashley is, I don't know within the district specifically, but I know in the West Ashley area, it's something like 500 something thousand. Somerville is something similar. Maybe it's in the 400,000s. But housing is very, very expensive. Buying a house is very expensive. I can't afford to buy a house. Wish I could, but I can't. So yeah, having more housing available for people to buy, to own also would be great to help drive down that price, make homeowning more attainable for people, especially for us young people. That would be a great thing to see as well.
Okay, let me repeat that same question I just asked you a few minutes ago. What current public-private partnerships would you have for that, for rent to own?
Did you say for rent to own?
I'm sorry, home as far as home ownership, helping people with that.
Oh yeah. There's a lot that we could do in terms of, again, some of the incentives that come into play with the attainable, affordable workforce housing that could also come into play with just development in general. A lot of some obstacles that I know of that exist to building large subdivisions is often like roadway improvements that are required at those subdivisions with the significant changes of traffic and whatnot. And I know that municipalities often cover a decent chunk of that cost. But if we were able to plan out our roadway improvement projects better to kind of anticipate that growth, and really partner our existing needs for growth within our infrastructure to the existing need for housing and then kind of tie that all together, that could really help us out.
So let me ask you this, as we sit here right now, what infrastructure projects are in place for your district as we sit here?
There's a lot of roadway expansion going on, and there's a couple of bridges that are currently in the process of being redesigned, expanded. Some of those I very much support. I think that, there's a couple of roadway expansion projects in Somerville going on. Dorchester Road, there's one. I'm forgetting the name of the road right now. I'm very much blanking. But yeah, we do have a couple of projects like that going on. But again, I think that projects like that need to be coupled with the, what's it called? Public transit, accessibility and stuff like that. And we need to keep all of that in mind because it is all related. Keep the stormwater needs in mind. I think that we should maybe focus a little bit less on just expanding roadways because ultimately that does not solve all of our traffic problems because bottlenecking still occurs even when the roads are many lanes wider. So yeah, there are some roadway expansion projects going on, but I would also love to see some more public transit accommodation going in within that as well.
And let me go right to it. Actually, as you know, that Carter runs really out to out to the West Ashley Circle and then turns back around and goes down to Citadel Mall. And of course, you have the number 12 Upper Dorchester that goes up to Dorchester Road and Ashley Phosphate, but it ends doesn't go past that, but it goes down Ashley Phosphate over to Rivers Avenue and back over to Otranto. What other locations will be ideal for public transportation in your district?
I think I would have to look up specifically where the existing hubs are and where we would need more connectivity. But just in general, more connectivity with public transit in general is so incredibly necessary. There's a lot of just in terms of the reliability of public transit, there's a lot that we could be doing to ensure that more people have access. I think especially around the majorly populated areas, ensuring that they have access is very important.
And right now, well, let's talk about that as well. How many people in your district actually use public transportation?
I don't think a lot of people do use public transportation, but I think that that isn't necessarily due to a lack of want for accessible public transportation. It's due to just that public transportation not being incredibly efficient, not being incredibly reliable. I would love to use public transit, but it's not established enough in this area for it to necessarily be feasible for a lot of people as an alternative to driving a car and whatnot. For people who do not have access to a car, I know that they do use public transit, so there are quite a few people who do, but ultimately, to help reduce traffic and congestion and whatnot, it would be great to have a more robust system with more connectivity. I know the rapid transit project is in the works in North Charleston. Having something like that in West Ashley or connecting to West Ashley could be incredible for getting some of those cars off the streets and encouraging people to use that public transit.
So when this project does come online, I think it's almost done. How many cars will actually get off the road and save a lot of traffic issues?
The rapid transit line, are you
Yes,
talking
ma'am.
about?
Oh yeah.
I'm not sure how many, well, I'm not sure how many cars that will remove from the road. That's mostly the line that I've mostly been looking at with that is from like North Charleston to Charleston or Somerville to Charleston.
Right.
Yeah, so not necessarily in my district. I hope that it will remove a significant chunk of cars. Even just providing that option, hopefully, would be enough for people to, say, I would like to use this public transit. But yeah, again, would love to see something like that. But I think that as that system becomes more robust and more efficient, more cost effective, more time effective for people, that will really encourage them to use it over prioritizing use of their individual cars.
And I wish I had more time to talk to you, but Zoom is telling me I got less than a minute. But Adrienne Lett, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin's Close Ups.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly.